Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great session during our Leveraging Intent Summit, Discover, Personalize, and Scale. Before we jump into the presentation, I would just like to go over a few housekeeping items. So below you will see an Attachments tab. There we have given to you some valuable resources, so please take advantage of those attachments tabs below, of that attachment tab below. Also, you will see a questions tab. This is the great benefit about us being live with our presenters today. Please send in your questions there, and our presenters will gladly answer those as we go through the presentation. You will also see a poll pop up a few times during our presentation, and that is also live, and we will see your answers as you submit those as well. Directly after this presentation is finished, you will be able to come back and view us on demand as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Garrett Mann and Uzair Dada.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Garrett Mann, and I'm really excited to be joined by Uzair Dada, founder and CEO of Iron Horse, an agency specializing in developer marketing and ABM. Today, we're going to be examining some key challenges in account-based marketing and exploring how we can help deliver more success by combining intent data and the common principles prevalent in developer marketing. More specifically, we're going to dive into how to find, influence, and convert more of the buying teams at your target accounts. But before we get started, I just want to take a quick temperature check of the audience to see where we are, right? So the first poll question is, are you doing account-based marketing programs today? You have a choice of yes, no, or not now, but planning to.
Be interesting to see what people say, Garrett.
Yeah.
We all believe that it's everywhere, and all the data we're seeing is everywhere. So it'd be interesting what the audience is doing.
Exactly. Let's see. See where these poll results end up. So all right. So it looks like I've got the results here. It looks like 76% of the audience is doing account-based marketing, and the other 24% aren't now, but are planning to. So I think we're in the right place. It's good.
It's incredible.
It sounds like we've got the right audience for this.
Incredible.
Who's there? So with that, let's get started. I'd like to talk first about buying teams. We talked a little bit up front about, the main focus of this presentation was to look at how to find, influence, and convert buying teams. So it makes sense to start with a look at what typical buying teams are in B2B. According to Gartner, there's an average of 11 individuals of all roles involved in a B2B purchase today. And obviously, it's bigger with larger implementations, smaller with smaller implementations. But you may ask, why are we starting here with this number? Well, what we've seen, and one of the biggest challenges and problems we've seen across clients and people doing account-based marketing is ABMers are continuing to focus efforts on the decision maker. So what that means is they're missing key members of that buying team, right? So, it starts reducing from there, sometimes focusing in on that lone buying team member. And, why do we see this as such a big problem? Well, in order to look a little bit more closely at this, let's take a look at an example that illustrates this. And this is data and research from TechTarget around a typical security purchase, right? What you're going to see on that buying team are a number of roles that are pretty diverse, right? In the blue, you see roles that are traditional stakeholders within the program. But as you can see, with different projects, different buying team members come in and out. You've got finance, you've got cloud, you've got line of business, you've also got developers, right? And the key thing to note here is that it's not just those exec levels that have approval or evaluation in these purchases. As you can see from the data, all of these people are involved in evaluating that program and in some cases approving purchases at the lower levels. So that really illustrates the reason why you want to expand your view of that buying team. Now, let's take a step back and look again at sort of what the importance of this is. Understanding that in today's market, prospect interactions are becoming more and more digital, right? This is data from Forrester, which shows the growth in interactions over the last 5 years. And what you can see is that there's almost double the amount of interactions happening within a buying cycle as there were back in 2015. And if you look more closely at the digital data, 66% of them, there's a 66 increase in just the last 2 years alone. So you can see that these are happening across the entire buying team, right? So if you're focusing in myopically on a smaller subset of that team, you're going to miss out on a lot of those interactions that are happening in market. And to take a look at this even closely, sort of your traditional customer journey has been pretty much thrown out the window right now. B2B buying is very complex. And as you can see from this particular chart here, it's multifaceted and it's really nonlinear. So what's happening here is that there are a number of decision points during this process, right? As you can see up in the top left, you have that starting point. In the bottom right, you have the purchase decision. But the reality is along the way, there are a lot of decision points happening within the buying team that vendors are not privy to, right? So there are all different roles involved with this, from developer to staff to mid-level manager on up to execs. And those decision points are happening before you move on to the next phase of the buying cycle. And sometimes they're returning to those decision points later in the process. And the biggest issue here that we see is that based on data from Gartner, only 17% of time that buying group is spending in that process is with vendors. And only 5% of the time is with any one single vendor. So you can really understand the importance of having full buying group coverage here to make sure that you're maximizing your time in cycle with all of those buyers. Uzair, did anything pop out to you?
This is yeah, to me, this is fascinating. Like, first, if everyone's not recognizing already, they should, that we are digital first. Second, it's extremely nonlinear, as you alluded to, but it's not only nonlinear, it's off-domain nonlinear. So if they're not coming to you, they're researching you, learning about you, and coming to you prepared to transact or come towards the end to do that. So to me, the customer journey, as we all thought about the customer journey, was very prospect-centric. We all had this vision of more linearity in the journey. It's completely thrown out. It's more about a path. What do I need? What do I need to consume? And how do I make that available to the different people on the buying team and make sure that I take out the friction in those paths? So I think it's absolutely fascinating from a marketing perspective of what we should do and how we should do things now.
Now, just to make this even more hard for everyone out there, it's not just more interactions, it's not more people involved in the process, but there are more channels that this is happening across, right? There are first-party channels, there are second-party channels, et cetera. So if you look at the data here, those number of channels that typical decision makers and buying team members go to during the cycle has doubled in the last 5 years. So you're seeing a repeating pattern here, which I think at the end of the day all rolls up to the fact that, you know what, this is really hard, right? It's not easy, and that's why we're here today, right? So, one of the things that Uzair and I thought about a lot before we put this together was, when you think about ABM, the idea of a full buying team really should be embedded in that, right? You have key accounts you're going after. You have, in some cases, a pretty finite list of accounts. You really should be chasing all the opportunities within those accounts. So at the end of the day, why do these challenges still persist? And we see this in a number of different ways, right? And some of the reasons why here. This legacy focus on senior titles, right? This is, when people are looking at who they want to go after in an account, they look at senior titles, and marketing focuses on senior titles because that's what sales and leadership believes they need, right? So again, legacy attitude, sort of the legacy demand attitude, really one lead equals an opportunity. There's an abundance of research from Forrester that talks about the idea of expanding the number of leads in an opportunity, and the prevalence of the way that things are done with sales. They get one lead, they open the opportunity with that one lead, and they ignore the rest. It's what they call buying group blindness. Now, the third area here is a narrow definition of buying teams and targeting, right? So this goes back to that example I shared earlier with the security buying team, right? If you don't have the right data to understand who is involved in those buying teams or what's happening during those buys, it's really hard to expand your view, right? So, you have this core buying team, but you also have project-based buying teams that include a lot more people. So it's very hard to get a handle on that and get that visibility into it. One of the more important things to discuss here too is that there's a lack of change management and alignment that we see in organizations. And I know, Uzair, you were pretty passionate about this one. I know you have a lot to say on this. So,
yeah, totally. And I think, if people often ask me about account-based marketing, and I'm like, ABM is not a marketing initiative. So the ABM and the M and the ABM is actually a misnomer.
Right.
It's not a sales initiative, it's a growth initiative. So you really have to act as one team, which is usually the challenge. And oftentimes we give lip service to alignment, but we don't really act on it. So we say, yes, that's great. But then the legacy leadership beliefs on this is a sales-led initiative comes in. Change management is often mistaken for training. And so we say, we rolled out, Priority Engine from TechTarget, or we rolled out something else, or Gong or Outreach, or whatever the components are for my strategy. And I did 1 or 2 webinars or training sessions with my rep, and I'm done. So there's such a misnomer of what needs to happen. And to me, the organizations where they truly think about this from a change management perspective and sustained change management perspective are usually the ones that are succeeding.
Right. And then the last one, which is really, a lot of what we're going to focus on in this presentation, is this idea of incomplete personas, right? And misunderstanding, core misunderstanding of roles and functions within the team, and especially on that role of the practitioner level. So not just that decision maker, but the people that are involved in planning, implementing, using, et cetera. And that we see is a huge gap in programs today, which brings us to our next poll question. And I really want the audience to be absolutely brutally honest here in answering this. The question here is, do you design marketing programs to target practitioners and not just decision makers. And let's see where we end up with this. It would be fascinating to understand, seeing as most of our audience is either doing or planning to do ABM.
This will be fascinating.
Yeah.
I would guess most don't.
Right. I think we're trying to get this poll loaded here.
It's still coming in.
Here we go. Here we go. I'm going to give everyone a couple more seconds, but I'm looking at these results and they're looking like they're aligned with what we're talking about here. All right, so let's end this. So we got 25, 62, 12.
75% sometimes too rarely.
Yeah, yeah. So
over 75%.
Yeah. So I think that this is definitely something. Well, it's a good thing that we prepared this presentation, right, Uzair? Because if the results didn't show up that way, we might have to end it early here. So, let's move on here and kind of get to the meat of the presentation, which is what I talked about earlier: how to find, influence, and convert buying team members across the cycle, right? So, in order to do this, there are, these are 4 things. There are many, many more, obviously, but these are the large level considerations that we want to talk through today. And the first is understanding the difference between decision makers and practitioners. What do they do? What makes them tick? What are their jobs to do, et cetera? Understand how to refine those practitioner personas for your ABM programs, right? We talked, the data there showed that people are doing this sometimes, they're doing it rarely, it's inconsistent. So it says to me that there's a need for a bit more refinement and optimization in that process. We're going to talk about leveraging intent, the subject of this entire summit. To maximize coverage of entire buying teams. And we're going to find out what strategies and tactics work and what doesn't work for engaging practitioners. And I think this is really where, when we talk about practitioners, developer marketing has a really strong connection to that, right? So, developers are on that practitioner level. And Uzair and Iron Horse have a real expertise in this area. So he's going to share, to start this presentation, he's going to share an overall framework of what developer marketing really is, and then we're going to get into how to find, how to influence, and how to convert those people going forward.
Awesome. Yeah, so I think this is super exciting. When we started talking to TechTarget, which is a very strong strategic partner for ours, we work with them very closely on a lot of our ABM and developer marketing initiatives. This was a topic near and dear to our heart, something we've been doing for over 20 years, and it's just become very in vogue that everyone's realizing that, oh my God, I need to be able to talk to practitioners, and there's so many awesome lessons to learn from developer marketing. So, kind of thinking about developer marketing, I think it's developers are probably one of the best examples to define practitioners and a traditional buying team ABM concept. If you think of a technology buying service and technology buying process today, we are so auto-tuned to talk to the beautiful ITDM acronym, the IT decision maker. And some of us get smart enough to talk to the BDM, the business decision maker. But if you think about the technology buying cycle, majority of the decision process, the evaluation process, the consideration process is all led by developers of some shape, form, or manner. And if we ignored the developer in our outbound strategy, if we were technology marketers, we missed the mark. We are focused on someone who may be the one signing the check. Even that is changing depending on what you're doing, but we may miss the person who actually does all the work and does the recommendation. So Some interesting principles to sort of think about when you're thinking about developer marketing. The first one is, as kind of based on all the data that Garrett shared earlier, the world we live in is completely different today. We're digital first. And if people are not coming to you, you have to go where they are. So the notion of waiting for them to come to you and raising their hand, and that becomes an MQL, is sort of dead. If 95% of the activity is happening, or 85% of the activity, depending on which metric you use, is happening off your domain, you have to be present in those watering holes where the developers are and have those conversations and participate in those conversations. The second is, once you know where they are and what they seek, and we're going to talk a lot about how to find them and how to think about intent today. Once you sort of identify and get them to pay attention to you and drive them to engage with you, you need to ensure that you don't give them dead ends. They come to you and they see 15 CTAs on your homepage, and God forbid you drove them to your homepage. That's a bad strategy. You really need to understand why they came to you, what was that purpose, and drive them to that action and not overwhelm them. That's a sure example of negative ROI on your media spend. The next part, which is equally important, is just because they're there the first time is not what makes them interesting. You really want to start building a relationship with them. To build a relationship with them, it doesn't end with the first touch. It actually starts with that. And so you need to have a very clear engagement pathways of what's the conversation arc and what's the engagement path you want to take with them. And ideally, you're doing that not just on your website, but you're really thinking about doing that across channels, because you have the tools today to be able to do that. And lastly, one of the biggest turnoffs for developers in today is they are sick and tired of chest beating. They want people to be helpful and authentic. They want to trust people that they care about. That's why developer-led content or developer-generated content has such more credibility than marketing-developed content. So authentic conversation, helpful conversation, not being product-centric, super important. And if you think about what I just walked through, almost all of that really holds true for any kind of non-developer ABM campaigns we do with buying teams. We want to make sure that we find the buyers and prospects from the buying teams in different places. We want to make sure that when we bring them to our website, that we're not giving them 10 CTAs. We want to make sure that we have a nurture path and ability to give them an engagement workflow. And lastly, no one wants you to kind of talk about how beautiful your product is all the time. They want to first make sure you're talking about use cases, make sure you're talking about how it'll helping them evolve their skill set or help them solve a problem they're looking for, and not just saying that you're the best. We're going to go into sort of kind of different areas. And the first one that I think we want to talk about is, based on sort of the early conversation, is, well, the developers are everywhere. How do I find them? Where do I go? Where do I focus? And one of the first things to kind of focus on, and this is sort of a stripped down version of the complex developer or the journey slide that Garrett alluded to and showed earlier from Gartner, is that the developer journey always has been, even before all this digital stuff happened, very nonlinear. Developers as a user persona binge content, right? They love when they're in their development mode or research mode or education mode to just go consume, and without any friction. Very anti-marketing, which is we want to linearize stuff. We want to give you something, wait and give you something more. So those two things don't always work well together. So when I'm thinking about discovering a product or solution, I want to learn about it. I want to ideally try it. All the product-led growth stuff that's happening is all around trying then buying, or trying then adopting. The more friction I introduce in the process, the more I'm going to lose the person during that cycle. So extremely, extremely important. And one of the things that's important that kind of along this area that I think Garrett and I were talking about, and Garrett asked me a question about, so where should people focus? And I said, it all depends on what they're trying to do. If you are a new company that is trying to create a new category of solution that no one knows about, you need to really focus on discovery and awareness because no one knows you exist. We are all, again, very much so tuned to focus on leads because our world has revolved around database growth. That's all we care about. But if no one can find you, leads don't matter. So you have to think about being available. But if you're an established product that people know, then focusing on education and use cases more sort of mid-funnel makes a lot more sense. So it all really depends on where you are and what you're doing. And really the outcome is sort of what drives the process. So moving from that, I think there's some really awesome stuff that the target team provides in terms of data sets. And maybe this is a great time, Garrett, if you want to walk us through this example. I think it's awesome.
Yeah. Just excuse me if I, start to geek out on intent data here, but, I think one of the things that Uzair mentioned on the last slide was this idea of a nonlinear engagement path, and we see this as a recurring theme with buying in general, and not just at the developer level. But if that's the case, how do you really find and determine the best time to engage? And I think the best gauge of that is really through observed activity and precise intent monitoring, right? So it takes accurate data, and it takes that accurate data accuracy to build confidence with sales, first of all, in terms of engaging with prospects and customers. But it also takes working towards that change management and that alignment that we talked about earlier. And intent data is something that teams can certainly align around. But to bring this to life, I wanted to take a closer look at this example, which is a recent large deal with defense contractor Mantech that happened over a 9-month period, right? And it involved a buying team of 34 members across 4 primary functions. And remember, earlier in the presentation, we said that we saw an average of 11 on a team, but for larger purchases, you actually have a lot more people involved than that. Through our intent data, we're able to track 291 activities from early research all the way through to purchase. And when we look back on the tendency to focus on decision makers, this really illustrates the huge opportunity to engage at that practitioner developer level. It may be a little bit hard to see, but you see the tan colors here represent developers in the buying cycle. And what you're seeing is they have heavy involvement throughout the majority of the cycle. And Uzair mentioned something before as well, which I wanted to reiterate here, is that in large purchases, they're not necessarily making that decision, but you better bet that in smaller purchases, they definitely are. So as you can see, throughout that early phase, throughout that middle phase, when that research is ramping up and those decision points are being made, and the purchase is taking shape, they're heavily involved. And as you get later and later, a little bit less involvement, as it comes time to sign on the dotted line. But overall, this really illustrates a huge missed opportunity when you're not focusing programs in on that practitioner level. And Uzair, you mentioned something before that I know you wanted to expand upon with this example around the idea of product-led growth.
Yeah, so I mean, when you think about PLG today, which is so in vogue because everyone wants to sort of make it more self-serviceable and get stuff going, and especially too in technology for all the infrastructure as a services components that are coming out, is that the developer is the decision maker and the evaluator and the sort of the entire changer, and developer is not developer, and they play a much more significant role. And oftentimes for a lot of open source initiatives that now convert into something that's a paid service, still it's very, very true. So don't ignore the titles. Again, something that I think Garrett alluded to. We get so hung up on titles sometimes that we forget to look at what people are doing. If you all you're doing, and we're going to talk about sort of how to build your personas and audiences, if all you're looking at a title and not really looking at what their role is and what they actually are doing, you're missing a huge opportunity.
All right. So when we talk about, finding where they are in the cycle, finding, using activity to pinpoint exactly how you're going to interact with them, you know, we want to pivot here to, how do you exert influence on them? How do you influence them? And, when you take a look at this, it's really, you can't think about this as just a buying cycle, right? I guess if you're going after, if you're doing a new logo ABM, it's really important to focus in on that initial buying cycle to try to close that deal with your new account. But smart ABMers are really always listening to intent, right? They're always looking at that activity that's happening in cycle, and more importantly, what's happening when you're building towards that next deal. And as we'll see a little bit later, when Uzair goes into some of the deeper principles of developer marketing, a lot of that groundwork for developer marketing is happening in between cycles. It's not happening during that buying cycle, right? It's happening, at that implementation phase, the usage phase, the building advocacy phase. So it's really, really important to understand that influence doesn't start and end in that initial buying cycle. You have to keep that going through, and especially with that practitioner or developer audience.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think this is a good transition to sort of how to start defining who the people are and the notion of personas. And can't emphasize enough, we at Iron Horse are audience obsessed. Whether we're talking to developers or other audiences for the ABM, for us, we sort of want to get in their heads. We want to understand who they are, what they do, what gets them excited, what motivates them, and ideally what role are they playing. And I think there's different ways to gather that insight, and we're going to share that in a bit. But if you look at this as an app developer example, understanding that, a little bit about, based on your insight of who they are, what they do, what are some plausible different job titles that go into it based on your own data or other pieces of data. We're going to talk about that. Understanding of their responsibilities, understanding of kind of how are they measured, what makes them successful, very much understanding what motivates them and what gets them upset. I think is a super important thing. And then using the intent data to understand where they're showing up based on what they're consuming and how they're doing it. There's a lot of good opportunity to sort of start using the data to start building these profiles. And one of the first things to think about is like, what do you look at? And I think this is an area where we all skimp. We sort of skip the steps. We don't use all the sources. We just want to hustle and pull together a pretty slide and call it a day. But we have usually access to pretty awesome data. So internally, if I look at stuff from a first party perspective, your web engagement data, gold. Your marketing automations data, really good. Your CRM engagement data, fantastic. Don't underestimate surveys that you are doing or your customer success teams are doing, or if you're doing panel studies or whatever it may be, invaluable. Social and community engagement data. If you're a developer, you live and die in the community. That's where all the interesting conversations happen from a product team perspective, from a pain point perspective. Product review sites, right? So your own product reviews that you have, or third-party product review sites that exist, like Trust Radius and G2s and Capteras of the world. Customer success and sales data. Again, talking to what Garrett alluded to earlier, we are so focused on winning the logo that we just don't care about after the win has happened. So customer success and engagement data, where the pain points are, where they're getting stuck, what they're doing, where is onboarding getting friction, yada, yada, fantastic. And then one of the biggest gaps that we see, especially on the technology side, is it's amazing how many companies don't use their own app and tools telemetry data to enhance what people are doing and what their needs are. So that's sort of an example of the first party portfolio of things that you want to sort of incorporate when you're thinking about persona insights. When it comes to external, competitive analysis is one of the biggest areas. So for us as a team, when we are sort of engaged on engagements or strategy engagements with customers, one of the first things we do is we look at what are competitors doing or other interesting people in that category, maybe adjacents doing from a messaging perspective, from a sales and marketing perspective, from a outreach perspective. And it's so simple to think through, but people don't take the time to think through that. Analyst is another great resource. We talked about the third-party survey panel data. And to me, the gold mine, and the gold mine that's become amazingly important now more than ever, is the real observed activity data that's happening off domain. We just talked about how 85% of the engagement happens off domain. And yet, if we don't take the time to stop and look at that, shame on us. So the big part of that is intent data, right? I mean, TechTarget is awesome from first party intent data. So using sort of what they have, there are other sources if you have the resources to do it, to layer additional intent, but intent data is gold. And then one of the other things we love doing when we are working with companies like TechTarget and other publishers is gleaning on editorial and publisher insights. And we'll talk about sort of what that looks like in a second. But that is amazing because these guys are thinking and living and breathing this every day. Not seeing what they are doing and using that to your advantage, again, is a missed opportunity. So if we sort of move forward in terms of sort of like how now, can kind of sort of unraveling and peeling the onion a bit. The first thing is, this is a great example. Every time we're doing sort of a customer engagement and strategy project around audience, the first thing I do is I talk to my TechTarget rep for the account and say, hey, can you give me audience insights and editorial insights on what's happening in this category? And I get this beautiful, usually slide from them about, here are all the different titles that are sort of involved in the process, this example being cloud workload security market, that are surging, that are looking at information like this. And by the way, and this insight on the right is super important, that 65% of these people have staff or architecture titles that are actually involved in decision-making responsibilities. Because I have gone to him by saying, my customer wants to focus on director and up, manager and up. That's all of us do that every day. But the team is really good about saying, let's not ignore that, what's happening. Let's look at that data and evolve kind of what we ought to be doing. So super, super important. And then the next step around that is, what are they consuming? What content are they consuming? So here are the type of things from an editorial perspective that's interesting that people are consuming. What is also really awesome, if you're building a strategy, is you want to know who else is talking to your audience. And so by getting an insight like this, saying, here's top content, but here's also what your plausibly competitor or plausibly partner or adjacent is talking about to the same audience, gives you an insight into the noise in the market and what the trends might be. So again, invaluable data as a practitioner to build that strategy. And as a result, sort of you've got that information. The last piece of the puzzle that we use extensively for in a lot of our engagements is a product that these guys have called Priority Engine, which is an intent-based platform for first-party data that exhibits who within accounts is now surging and showing intent. So it's a fantastic resource to start building a reality of who the buying team is. So in this example, this is Acme Corporation. We've changed the name of the company, but the data is actually pretty real. It shows sort of who are the different people, literally who they are, that's actually searching them, their titles, their real names, their contact information, because they've opted in to Priority Engine. What topics are they researching? What content are they consuming? What kind of vendors they may be looking at? If you're actually running programs with them, you may also layer in information of, have they looked at you? Have they consumed your content? Which is invaluable because now you have multi-layered insight about them. And then you have technographic and firmographic insights that are coming along with it. So you're starting to see the picture. You're layering intent. You're layering different pieces of information to start driving your strategy. You start developing your strategy. And as you do that from that perspective, you then say, okay, now that I know here are the different people that are involved in my buying team, here's my practitioners, and practitioners, again, it's a very general label because within practitioners, there's different types of people. And here's my decision makers. What kind of content should I have to support what they need? And this is just a splattering of some examples on it from a developer marketing perspective, what works really well. So for practitioners, because they are truly practitioners, they care about innovation. They care about R&D. They care about how things work. How will it work for their needs? How do they get started based on what they know, their use cases? They care about documentation and how-tos that help them do their job. They love being able to talk to people or talk to someone in the community so that they don't get stuck, right? So having AMA sessions, workshops, office hours, training webinars, fantastic. We talked about this earlier. Since they trust their developers, the more developer stories you can share, the more they're going to trust you because they trust that peer group. And then, of course, white papers are always good if they're doing anything technical. That doesn't mean you have to ignore the decision maker because that's also still an important person. And your traditional things that you think about from a TCO perspective, from a thought leadership perspective, from ebooks perspective, from our evaluation checklists and case studies are still important. But if all you did was that, you lost a big opportunity for people who are actually doing the work. Garrett, I think is it still me or is it you?
Still you.
It's
still you.
Okay. I'm sorry. Great. Awesome. So from transitioning to now, we've sort of talked about how to define who they are. We define what kind of content works with them. Now it's all about how do I create a program to engage them? So how do I make this all come to life? And one of the best ways to think about it is sort of, we've all got our own different levels of customer journeys, or in our case, for developers, we call them developer engagement journeys. And sort of how does that manifest itself? So I think kind of setting that and thinking about that is really goes. For us, if you think about the structure, the top area is the developer engagement journey, and engagement is the emphasis, right? Which is how do we help them discover our product? How do we help them learn about the category, what they're trying to solve? What do we give them to evaluate? Because our goal is for them to use our tools to develop. So in the PLG mode, super true. And if I do that right, and they like it, and it's friction-free, everything is not gated, they become my best fan club, right? So they're big influencers and advocates. On the persona side, it's sort of going from anonymous, I don't know you, you've never interacted with me, to known. Now you're starting to see some first party and third party data. So I sort of know you're interested in us. This is where majority of the stuff stops. Most of us get happy that they downloaded a white paper or they attended my webinar, and I start bombarding the crap out of them and start sending emails galore, sales calls galore, and marketing is not informing sales and sales is not informing marketing, and it's just a mess. And we sort of kind of overemphasize the left two columns, where the biggest opportunity lies is in the middle, engage and enthusiast state, which is if we now have a good conversation arc to follow and nurture so that they can truly find their way to action, which in this case is development, they become sort of a lifelong customer and advocate. And if there's one takeaway from this that I would say is, please go back and look at what you're doing post lead generation. And lead generation doesn't mean truly that you have a name. Lead generation means someone showing and exhibiting intent. Don't forget about that conversation. Think about how to extend that conversation. That's where majority of people miss out. So if we build from this, I think one of the key things that I like to always share when I'm talking about this strategy is, and I'm sorry, I don't know why the slide is crunching a bit, is what does a program look like? So if I'm building a developer marketing program across a life cycle of discovery, learning, evaluation, and development, what does that look like? So the outer circle is an example of potentially all different paid media activities that you want to potentially partake in. And the inner circle is sort of company-led nurture and follow-up activities. So in the discovery stage, I'm from a paid media perspective, I could run a tech target ABM display campaign. I could do content syndication for my targeted accounts. Community evangelism is huge. So working with D Zones of the world and Stack Overflows of the world and so forth, if you're doing developer marketing. As I move up or down the funnel, making sure I'm using intent-based data from Priority Engine and building my retargeting strategy. I'm doing social retargeting. I'm doing third-party content syndication because they don't want to hear chest beating. They want to hear other people's opinion. I'm attending developer events. I'm participating in AMAs and hackathons and contests and so forth so that people can sort of get to know us. And lastly, I'm using community all the way around. So lots of interesting things you can do. It's not a one and done strategy, as we kind of talked about earlier in the cycle. It really is something that's much more waterfall that you sort of have to be on all the time. So key takeaways from this, I think that are interesting for you guys to kind of think about, and hopefully this has been helpful from an ABM perspective, is understand this is an engagement journey and not a buying cycle. You're trying to build a relationship with these people. And this doesn't apply for just developers, it applies to any prospects you're talking to. If you think of them very transactional, you lose out. You need to be where they are. You have to realize what their watering holes are and get those right and be present where they are, because they're not going to come to you. They're going to come to you very much at the end. So if you're missing out on the opportunity of finding them where you're going to be lost. They don't know you exist all the time. You absolutely need to be more human in how you talk to them. So humanize, not just personalize, is super important in your conversation. And lastly, this is where we all, for lack of a better term, suck at, really, is the post-lead follow-up. We don't do enough to engage people, to build that relationship, to nurture that relationship, and to foster that relationship. And this is where most brands fall short. All things that are correctable, and hopefully some of these lessons are helpful and help people building better habits to sort of further their ABM strategies.
Yeah, and one of the points you made on this slide here, Uzair, is this first one. Understand that it's an engagement journey, not a buying cycle. If you go back to the slide that you were showing before, the buying cycle is happening in that learn and evaluate phase. It's a relatively small part of that engagement cycle. And it goes back to the slide that I showed earlier, which shows that a lot of that groundwork is being laid, between deals. And this, I think, really brings that to life. And it's something that everyone should really think about, as they're trying to develop, those people that are saying that they rarely or sometimes design programs for this. These are the things you really should think about. So we're going to roll through these last, overall takeaways, because we want to leave a few minutes for questions, but let's just jump right into them and we can have some commentary along the way. If you take away 4 things from this presentation, this is exactly what you really need to think about. 1, ditch your legacy demand-driven views, right? One lead does not equal an opportunity, and the decision maker is not the only one that matters. So do away with that thinking. Open your mind to going after the influencers of these deals, the people that are actually using the product and doing the work during the research cycle, and you'll reap the benefits of it. Recognize that ABM success depends on reaching the full buying team. Now, of course, you're gonna have those opportunities where you're gonna hit the jackpot. You're gonna hit the guy who's a decision maker, or the woman who's a decision maker, and they're gonna move forward with you, and they're gonna open the door to the other people on the team. But those opportunities are few and far between. So really, what you want to do is use intent data first and foremost to increase your visibility into buying team activity and interest. Going back to what we talked about early on about not having that data to understand who is on that buying team, it's key. And I did take a peek at one of the questions, which talks about how do you know what their role is versus their title. And this is it, right? It's Uzair showed that slide about there are different titles involved in this market. There are different responsibilities and purchase responsibilities even at that staff level. So understanding title is not as much of an indicator as activity. That's really where you get into their role. You see their role because you're observing how they behave, what they consume during the buying process or during that overall engagement journey. Understanding differences between decision makers and practitioners, pretty straightforward, simple. And then, as with any type of marketing sales program out there, continuous refinement, right? Especially when it comes to personas, right? Uzair, you guys build personas for developers, for practitioners all the time, but those can't be static point in time views of who they are, because as new products hit the market, as companies shift and change, we talked about digital only. There are more responsibilities that are coming along, and you cannot have that be a point in time activity. You have to continuously refine based on the insight that you have. And then the number three takeaway here, and arguably could be the number one takeaway, probably should have been, dedicate more resources and energy to engaging practitioners, right? Apply the principles of developer marketing, find their watering holes, be authentic, actively participate. A lot of the things that Uzair was just talking about. These are the things that you need to dedicate your resources, energy, time towards building out, because you will definitely see that come back to you in revenue and engagement. And recognize digital first as a new normal, right? This has been happening a lot. This has been happening over the last several years, right? So, Uzair talked about that omni-channel developer marketing program. That is designed to increase touches across channels. This is what everybody needs to be doing. That's the way you earn more time and influence in cycle. And then that point you made about continuing to engage post-lead, that's essential, not just for reaching developers, but this is a core principle when it comes to retention and renewal efforts for ABM. We talked about new logo ABM versus traditional ABM, and retention and renewal is absolutely crucial. So continuing to engage post-lead, that's absolutely something that everyone needs to be doing. Uzair, is there anything you wanted to add to those?
I think not only, I would say for the last point, it's not only they need to be doing, but I think there needs to be alignment between marketing and sales to what does it take to nurture and engage them. Because oftentimes, the number of times we see the traditional finger pointing saying, oh, my leads suck that marketing gave me, they give me shitty leads. And, it's not crappy. It's just because I call them twice or I send them one email every 2 weeks and I expect them to do something. Well, right. Our system is flawed. So I think there needs to be just a fundamental rethinking of what that relationship marketing or relationship development model looks like and what does it take. And I think that's where a lot of bad stuff happens that could be better.
Right. So I think with that, I think we're going to get into some questions here. Then there's been a few that have come in, and I'll take the first one here. Most of the intent available on market is at the account level only. Are you able to get the same insights for individuals? Well, we saw this in play a bit during the presentation, right? A lot a lot of intent is driven at that account level because there is an ownership of the content that is driving those activities, right? It's sourced from different places, like the bid stream, for instance. There aren't a lot of providers out there that provide that type of insight down to the individual level. TechTarget does, because we own the content, we have the opt-in, we understand what people are doing, and that's really essential, because if you think about accounts, an account doesn't buy, people buy, and an account is a collection of people. So if you don't understand who those people are, what makes them tick, what they're interested in, that account level insight can only take you so far. If you're able to get down to the individual level, you can really action that insight a lot more effectively. Let's see, one other question that came in here. How important is video storytelling during an ABM motion? I'm going to give that to you, Uzair, because you did talk about developer stories, et cetera.
Yeah. Totally. I think it's extremely important. Everything from sort of being authentic and having that conversation, everything from having training that is more visual and feels more humanized, everything from, today, a lot of the times when we have tooling there, it's hard to get to or how to provision them for people to try it. So people are using videos or interactive tools to make them much more accessible so people can try it and test it. Incredibly important. I mean, again, think about if the more you can have a conversation that's more dynamic, the better you're answering their question, the more you're removing that friction that exists in the process. So on the tech buying side, and definitely on the developer marketing side, amazingly important. And I would say it's becoming very true as well on the ABM side. And I'd say it's really true not just on the marketing side, but you're seeing a lot of the CRM tools now have the ability to send out videos from the reps that are much more personalized. Sticks out, right? I see something someone has done, taken the time to talk about me, about my information, used hopefully the intent data. Extremely useful. So yeah, I would say big trend and will continue.
Got it. Looks like there's one more question here, and I think that's all we have time for is, what's the revenue opportunity involved with expanding buying group visibility? Well, it's hard to determine exactly what that opportunity is. But what I can tell you is that, according to Forrester, 80% of buys have 3 or more members that are part of that buying team, and it goes up and up and up based on the total amount of money involved with that. So in terms of expanding buying group visibility, you have to think about it in terms of the signals that you're getting, right? So there are 3 connections you need to understand to complete that view and make sure you're maximizing your opportunity. The first connection, what I talked about earlier, is at the individual level. Of course, you obviously need to look at those signals from those particular buyers. Then at the account level, what is the overall opportunity? What's the collective activity from those buyers? And then you have to go into buying group and opportunity, right? So a lot of companies out there have solution signals aligned with their solution. If you can connect those to buying groups and individuals, that's the gold standard. That can help you open up opportunities, your revenue opportunities with buying groups, and help you get more out of your ABM programs. So I think that is it. That's all we have time for. I think we're right up against it. So I just want to thank everybody for taking the time out of their day to listen to us and to go through this presentation. I want to thank Uzair for helping us understand developer marketing. And I hope you guys found this helpful. And with that, we're going to go ahead and end the talk and enjoy the rest of your day.